Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm pretty excited with this rifle today. This is a SIG 543 rebuilt as a semi-auto for me by Troy S. at TTE Precision Metalworks. We got a batch of, well, two sort of batches of SIG semi-auto rifle parts kits just fairly recently, and they came in from Lebanon. So interestingly, this is the original lower of the gun. This has a Lebanese Army property mark on it. We got 543s and we got 542s as parts kits in. Now, the SIG 540 is a whole series of rifles. This was developed in the 1970s, essentially by SIG. Actually, the long backstory on this is that in the 1960s, SIG and Beretta collaborated on what was going to be a roller delay or a roller locked 5.56 caliber rifle. This stems from Beretta, Beretta and SIG collaborating to make SIG 510 rifles for the Chilean army because they couldn't be exported due to Switzerland's neutrality laws. So Switzerland made most of the parts, sent them to Italy, where Beretta did final assembly, exported them to the Chilean army. This led to a collaboration on a new 5.56 rifle development from 1963 to 1968, at which point the collaboration completely fell apart, and the two companies went their own separate ways. Beretta turned the project into the Beretta AR-70, and SIG turned it into the 530 and then the 540 series. So the 540 is the full-length rifle. The 543 is the little short carbine here, 11.5-inch barrel and a folding stock. The 542 is a version in 7.62 NATO, which is interesting. And then the 541, you pretty much never see around. Well, the 541 was in a 6.5 millimeter cartridge that the Swiss military was experimenting with. The 541 ends up becoming the SIG 550, and we know all about the 550 series. So what we're doing here is we're looking at SIG's, this is state-of-the-art SIG semi-automatic rifle from the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I mean, they look really cool. They're very neat guns. I'm excited to do some shooting with this one. I have just gotten it in. So let's fire a few shots and then talk about where exactly this came from, because in addition to all of these other countries involved, it's also a French rifle, naturally. We have 20 round mags here. They made both 20s and 30s for the 540 series. That is an incredibly pleasant rifle to shoot. I was honestly expecting a lot more recoil, a lot more kick than that. And no, even though this thing is tiny and short and handy, that's really fun. And look, did I mention they look cool? The 540 series is just a really neat batch of guns. All right, I mentioned that these are also French. Well, the reason for that is, once again, Switzerland's neutrality laws. So Switzerland prohibits the export of military firearms to countries that are in a state of war. And this involved Chile with the 510s, and so they collaborated with Beretta to make the guns. Well, by the time they come around to these rifles, it's a little bit later, and they instead collaborate with Manurhin in France. And so we get a whole series of SIG Manurhin rifles. Now, this is the new American semi-automatic upper, but they have recreated all of the original markings, including SIG for Switzerland and Manurhin for French manufacturing. The Manurhin factory also did this for the Germans. You see Walther PPs and PPKs made by Manurhin. They made a bunch of interesting stuff for a bunch of different people. And in fact, the French military did purchase a batch of 540s. Various elements of the French military used them as a temporary rifle while the FAMAS was in development, but before it was actually adopted. So the French bought these and took them to places like Chad and Lebanon in the 70s and 80s. The Lebanese army then also adopted them, and that's what we have here, our Lebanese army parts kits. You may notice this has a solid aluminum pistol grip. That's not original. This originally should have been a sort of greenish, dark greenish plastic like the handguards. I am pretty sure that this is a locally produced Lebanese stand-in because these rifles had a hard life in Lebanon, and a lot in the parts kits there were a lot of cracked plastic components. And so I suspect, if the hand grip cracks, you can just kind of deal with it. But if the pistol grip breaks, you can't really use the rifle. So they probably had to make some sort of replacements, and cast aluminum was easier than making their own plastic molds. The trigger is not great. In fact, the trigger is actually pretty bad by most standards. It's a long, heavy, squishy trigger pull with a long reset. But the gun itself is very comfortable to shoot, so. All right, let's go ahead and take this back inside and let me tear it apart and show you how it works, because the SIG 540 series is kind of, well, it's often considered basically a Western AK. All right, let's take a closer look here. So first off, to fold the stock, you actually just grab the two tubes, squeeze them together, and rotate. The pin's on this side, so it's going to rotate in that direction. Folds in like that. There's nothing that holds it in place. Well, sort of a little bit of tension, but to unfold it, you just grab and open it like so. We have an AK style of mag release there. This is the 20-round magazine. They did also make 30s, and the magazines for the SIG 540 and the SIG 543 are identical and interchangeable. All right, moving on to some of the markings. I do need to point out, once again, this is an American-made semi-auto upper. This is from Troy S. at TTE Precision Metalworks. So these are not original markings, but they are a very quite good reproduction of the original markings. So we have SIG, that would be SIG Neuhausen in Switzerland. Model number on this is SG543. SP is the modern American model number. This was originally a pistol, and I SBR'd it. The original guns were just marked SG543. Then we have Manurhin, which is the manufacturer, the actual original, well, the official original manufacturer. SIG introduced these rifles in 1973, and then when the Swiss Army wasn't interested in them, they started looking to export contracts, but Swiss law was rather restrictive on who they could export small arms to, so they subcontracted to Manurhin to make the entire 540 series, which Manurhin did from 1978 until 1988. So our serial number. As I pointed out earlier in the video, this is the Lebanese Army, Armée Libanaise crest, and this is on the lower, so these are original actual markings. These guns, the 540s and the 543s, were sold across a wide swath of sort of the, well, what would classically be the third world, the countries that were neither NATO nor Soviet bloc aligned. So a bunch of countries in South America, in the Middle East, in Southern Asia, in Africa, bought SIG 540 series guns. I have unfortunately been unable to find a list of specifically who bought the 543 as opposed to the longer 540 series, but these did see use by both militaries and police forces. I know actually the French police, I believe, adopted the 543, some elements of the French police, as did other police agencies. And lastly, up top here, we have TTE's manufacturing marks. So this is the legal receiver element under US law, so that's what has been made new to turn this from a parts kit into a semi-automatic rifle. Anyway, as I also mentioned earlier, this is, I believe, a Lebanese-made replacement grip. It's a cast aluminum grip instead of the original plastic. We have a folding trigger guard here that just pivots up to the side so that you can use this with heavy gloves or mittens. The selector on the 540 series is pretty cool. There's a little plate on the inside that includes the selector markings, and whichever setting you have it on just shows through this little window in the receiver. So this is semi-auto, so I've only got safe and single, but you also had options for full auto on the original guns. These use a sight similar to the HK drum, although it does not have a notch sight. So this has apertures for 1, 3, 4, and 500 meters. And the front sight is that sort of wing protected blade there. Birdcage flash hider is standard, and we have our gas regulator on the front. So the 1 position is regular, 0 is cut off, which you don't really ever need for these short guns. The 540s and the 542s had the capability to launch rifle grenades, and for that you would want to cut off the gas. For this, there's no real good reason to cut off the gas. You would use 1 for regular or 2 for the adverse position if you need more gas for some reason. And then lastly, this little trapezoidal feature along with this divot in the rear sight, those are actually mounting points for an optics mount. That was typically used more on the full-size 540s, but the receiver for the 540 and the 543 is the same. So even on the short little carbine version, you get this optics mount. And that's certainly a thing that you could use today to put a scope on or to adapt a red dot sight to these in their original configuration. Like many other cool Cold War rifles, these predate the general issue of optics, so you just have iron sights on them. All right, disassembly of the 540 series is pretty slick and kind of cool. So we're going to start with this rear pin. Just push that out, and that allows you to pivot open the upper and lower. Now I'm going to take the lower assembly completely off, and to do that I actually just have to lift this up, and then I can push this pin out right here. So this is a slightly different style of pin. You can see it has these 2 grooves in it. This is not meant to be tapped out, really. Instead, the lower handguard has 2 little tabs on it right here. So to take that pin out, you just reach in here and gently lift up the tab on the handguard. It is plastic. You don't want to, use too much force on it. But when you lift this up, you can then just push the pin out. And when the gun is assembled, those 2 tabs sit in these 2 grooves and lock that pin in place, prevent it from coming out. Now, here's an element that people probably aren't going to expect. You don't see this very often on other rifle designs. In order to continue the disassembly, I'm going to remove the gas block. So I have this screw down here. You're supposed to do this with the rim of a cartridge, but I'm just going to use a big screwdriver. Rotate this 180 degrees, and it's got a little divot that locks into that roll pin. Once I do that, I can slide this forward. Now on the full-size 540, this works really nicely because you've got a lot more barrel here. You pull this all the way forward, rotate it down, and you can then pull the gas piston out the top of the gun. Because I have so little barrel space before that flash hider, I actually have to pull the gas piston back slightly in order to get this done. So I'm going to pull the charging handle back. There we go. So that's our gas piston there. Pull the charging handle back, rotate this down. So next up, I need to disconnect the bolt carrier from the recoil system. So to do that, I'm going to push this little tab back. You can do that with a cartridge as well, but I'm going to do it with this screwdriver. I pull that back, and then I can just lift the charging handle out. There we go. Then I just unlock the bolt and slide it out the back of the receiver. Once I have done that, I can then pull the gas piston out the front of the action, which is, yeah, kind of unusual. There we go. So we have a gas piston with a recoil spring wrapped around it. We then have the gas tube that also slides out from the front. So you can then take the handguards off, but there's not really any need to, and these handguards are old and fragile plastic on these parts kits, so I'm going to be pretty careful with them, and I'm just going to leave those alone there. But what we have at this point is a barreled upper receiver. You've got a front trunnion that's spot welded in place there that includes, this is essentially an AK style trunnion. We've got 2 locking lugs, rotating bolt, barrel locked in place there. And if we take a look at the bolt carrier and bolt, well, again, it's not interchangeable with an AK, but the mechanism is the same as the AK. So 2 locking lugs up here, there and there, breech face your extractor, slot for your ejector, and then you have a rotating cam lug that is in a slightly different configuration than an AK, but that runs in this track right here. So in operation, we have, well, that is locked and that is unlocked. And this is, in fact, a long stroke gas piston action because while there's no gas piston here, that is because the piston and the bolt carrier separate for disassembly. So in normal operation, they're locked together like this with the charging handle, and they operate as one component. I do want to point out there's actually a roller bearing on the top of the bolt carrier to help it move smoothly, which is really nice. These guns are really, really nicely made and really nice to shoot. We can take a quick look in our fire control group here. You'll see instead of having a coil spring, they have a longitudinal spring in here for the hammer. So that has a number of subtle advantages. The biggest one is because this is located off center of the pivot axis of the hammer, there is the greatest resistance on this when it's at the very top of its travel. As it starts to get set back, or as it starts to rotate down, the amount of force required to push it down actually reduces because of the difference, the location between where the spring is attached here and where the hammer is actually pivoting. So because you have the least force required as the hammer is the farthest down, that means that as the bolt carrier is coming to the end of travel where it has the least remaining momentum, you have the least necessary to recock it. So as the gun potentially gets dirty and grimy and you have less energy in the bolt, this will still cycle, in theory, longer than a gun with an AR-15 style of coil spring. And by the way, you can actually see the plate in there with the original selector markings. So the original parts kit here had a white S for safe, and then a red 1 for semi and a red 20 for full auto, because these guns were, like, in theory, intended for the 20 round mags, where the 30s were for the full length rifles. All right, so there you go. There is a field stripped SIG 543. If it wasn't really evident from the shooting segment at the beginning, I really enjoyed this little rifle. It is light, it is handy, it is soft shooting, it's fun. The trigger is pretty horrible. Long, squishy, heavy trigger. I think that is just an effect of having to come up with a semi-auto only modification to the original SIG 540 series triggers, which were not intended for that sort of modification. But even with that, this gun was just a lot of fun to shoot. So in the interest of full disclosure, I did purchase the kit myself, and I paid in full for the semi-auto build with the receiver from TTE Precision Metalworks. So this is all me, and I'm really happy that I made that investment because it's a really fun gun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.